All right, hey American history kids, we are going to get started. Please make sure you go through my video instruction as well as the PowerPoint to be able to fill out this assignment because not everything's on the PowerPoint, so you need this to be able to fill in your work. We're going to do just an introduction with this and go through the New England colonies, and that will be your assignment for Monday. So you should have this document pulled up that you are going to fill out, and the big ideas of what we want to talk about today were, how were these English colonies started, these 13 original colonies? What makes the colonies alike and different from one another? What are the big events? We're going to talk about some of those big events today that define the early years of the American colonies, and how was slavery introduced and then made part of colonial life. So let's get started with our information, and then remember, as we go through, I'll kind of point out things that you're supposed to be filling in. So the 13 original colonies, here they are. Hopefully you're familiar with the names and locations of where these colonies are located. So how did these 13 colonies come to be? People from England came to colonize and settle the land that England claimed as its own, but there's a little bit of a problem when we talk about our starting of these 13 colonies. There were people that were already living on this land, and the people are called Native Americans. So it was an interesting concept that England came over and staked claim to territory that people already lived on. It's like someone coming over and knocking on your door to your house and saying, I live here now. No, you don't. I lived here first. It's going to be a little bit of an issue. Here's a map I just want to show you. Look at how many Native American tribes were already living in New England when the colonists of like the Puritans, the Pilgrims, started to come over. Everything that you see here is a purple name of a Native American tribe that was established and living in that area when English colonists were setting up Plymouth Rock and Massachusetts Bay. Shout out to my favorite Disney movie, not at all historically accurate whatsoever. Pocahontas and John Smith did not end up together. But I do love the song Colors of the Wind. If you need a song break, you can click on it and jam out as you do your work. But I love the line where she says, "You think you own whatever land you land on." That was the concept for England because they came over and just landed on that land. They claimed it for England, even though it was already territory that other people lived on. All right, so there are two types of main colonies that you need to know, and this is where we're going to start filling things in. Every colony had to receive a charter from England, and a charter was the legal groundwork to start the colony. So there were three types of colonies, but the corporate colony doesn't last long. That really is only associated with Jamestown. There were things called joint stock companies, which were businesses that people funded to send people across the Atlantic Ocean to come to the Americas. The two colonies that you really need to know about are royal colonies and proprietary colonies. Now, once again, if you copy and paste this directly from the PowerPoint, I'm not going to give you credit. So you need to sum up and get the idea, which is how I'm explaining this to you now. A royal colony is a colony that the king totally controlled. Virginia is an example of this. And since obviously the king is in England and the colonists are across the ocean in the Americas, the king sends a governor to live over there to enforce his rule. That's a royal colony. So bottom line, royal king, king's in charge. A proprietary colony is when the king gives the charter of ownership to an individual. An example of this we're going to talk about is going to be Pennsylvania. The king of England gave the land of Pennsylvania to a guy named William Penn, and William Penn ruled the colony. Now, at the end of the day, if the king tells William Penn to do something, he has to do it, but William Penn is in charge for the most part, not the king. Where a royal colony, it's the king. Okay. The English colonists, when they start to come over, they're used to representative government. Even though England has a king, he's a constitutional monarch, which means he has to follow a constitution, and he has to listen to Parliament, and Parliament are elected representative officials for the people. So all these colonists that are coming over that are living in the 13 original colonies, they still expect a say in their government, and that's going to be a problem, which is something that's going to help lead to the American Revolution. All right, one of our first big events is Bacon's Rebellion. That's going to fill out this little area. All right, so Virginia was a very large area of farming, and it remained as so. It actually still is a huge area of farming today in 2020. Virginia had a lot of large, rich farmers, and the poor farmers who couldn't really afford a lot of land got kicked off onto the side of Virginia over on what we would call the frontier. The governor who was elected by the king, who was sent over there, his name was Sir William Berkeley. He put in a lot of policies that favored the rich and abused the poor. He also did not protect these poor farmers who were kicked off onto the side of Virginia on a frontier. He didn't protect them from attacks by Native Americans. So this new guy comes over from England to be a colonist. His name is Nathaniel Bacon. Gotta love that name. And he was a poor small farmer. He got really, really ticked off at Nathaniel Bacon for this, and he tried to appeal to Berkeley and Nathaniel Bacon got ticked off at Berkeley. He tried to appeal to Berkeley, and Berkeley was like, sorry, not going to help you. So Bacon says, well, then I'm going to help myself. And he puts together this ragtag group of guys, makes a little army, and goes and raids Native American villages and unfortunately kills, a bunch of people. On the frontier of Virginia. Well, Berkeley tried to stop Bacon because Bacon was stirring up trouble, but Bacon's forces actually beat Berkeley's army, and then to celebrate, they went to the Jamestown settlement that was still there in Virginia and burned it to the ground. Now, Bacon died from dysentery, which is where you get a disease where you have diarrhea until you die. That's super fun. And when he died from dysentery, the rebellion was over. But this really kicks off an important thing that you need to learn about. The importance of Bacon's rebellion is that already in the colonies, there's a problem with class, meaning there are rich and there are poor, and there is a stark difference between the two of them, and it is already causing issues. The rich farmers are happy, the poor farmers are not. The other thing that this points out is that people in the colonies are already resisting the royal control. Like Berkeley was the royal governor, and people are already resisting what the crown tells them to do, which sets the stage for the American Revolution. All right, that's one of those big events early on that's going to shape how the colonies look. All right, the need for labor. Manual labor was needed in every colony to keep the colony going, and it was inexpensive to make a trip from England to the colonies. So many people had stopped coming over. Also, other people heard how hard it was for them to live and survive, that all these people were dying from things like dysentery, and they didn't want to risk moving over here and potentially either dying on the boat before they even made it over, or getting here and not being able to feed themselves, or dying from disease, or dying from a Native American attack. So there were 3 types of labor that was used in the colonies because there was a high demand for it. The first one is an indentured servant. An indentured servant, this is a term that I still use today, comically, like I talk about my college education being an indentured servitude because North Carolina paid for me to go to school for 4 years, as long as I promised to be a teacher for 4 years after I graduated, and I considered that to be like an indentured servitude. Granted, I've been in the classroom now for 13 years, so I think they got the good end of that deal. An indentured servant in the Americas agreed to come over from England and essentially be a slave for 4 to 7 years to pay off the debt that was paid, like the debt that they accrued from coming over, because it cost a lot of money to put a ship together to come over. You worked for free for the time of your indenture, and you received room and board, which means you got somewhere to sleep and food to eat. And at the end of your indenture, you could start earning wages, or you could get a little piece of land to farm for yourself. Okay, a lot of indentured servants ended up in Georgia. The headright system was you would receive 50 acres of land in the colonies from the king if you could pay your own way on a boat from England to the colonies. A lot of people signed up for that because 50 acres was a lot of land. And a plantation owner could also receive 50 acres more of free land if they paid for immigrants to travel over here. So they were footing the bill to get people to leave England and come to the colonies. Now, the third and obviously worst type of labor was African slavery. The first African slaves were brought to the colonies by Dutch traders because the Dutch controlled the trade routes from Europe to Africa. And in 1650, there were only 400 Africans in the colonies, but that number is then going to explode as you get closer to 1700. By 1660, there were already racist laws going into effect that were saying if you were a female from Africa and you had a child while you were in the colonies, that child remains a piece of property, which once again, that's the reason that slavery is so disgusting, is because we look at human beings as property. All right, the 13 original colonies, the only ones that we are going to talk about right now are the New England colonies. I'm going to include a slide about each colony. You need to know where each colony came from, and you need to know what is unique about that colony. So once again, there are 3 areas, New England, Middle, and Southern. We are going to learn about the first couple New England colonies for today. And here's a beautiful map laying out those colors for you. All right, so on here, you know the first colony that was established that's not New England is Virginia, and that was the establishment of Jamestown in 1607. The first New England colony we're going to talk about is Massachusetts. Massachusetts is your Thanksgiving story. All right, religious Puritans. These are the Puritans. There are Pilgrims. They were a religious group in England who were actually being persecuted by the King of England, James I. He didn't like Puritans, and so they got on a boat, came over, and landed at the famous Plymouth Rock. Here's the image of Plymouth Rock. You can go visit it in Massachusetts. It's very underwhelming. And they set up their own colony. These were the Pilgrims. This was the Thanksgiving story. Puritans are super, super strict religious group that believe in purifying everything about Christianity. They're Protestants, they're not Catholics, and they just believe in like very strict, perfect behavior, like no singing, no dancing, being super sinless is what they wanted. They were so strict that if you did not follow the exact rules of the Puritan religion, you were kicked out and banished from the colony. Okay, so Puritans set up Plymouth Rock, Plymouth Colony right here. They also set up Massachusetts Bay, and eventually this will become one Massachusetts colony. Okay, now people don't really like the Puritans unless you're in good with the Puritans because they're kicking so many people out. This is your first New England colony, Massachusetts. Puritans ran it. Rhode Island is going to be our second one, and it is developed by people who were kicked out by the Puritans. Massachusetts and Rhode Island are right beside each other. When the Puritans were kicking out people for not being religious enough, they were kicked out over here into Rhode Island. And Rhode Island gets the nickname Rogues Island because it was full of the sinners who were kicked out by the Puritans. So it's called Rogues Island instead of Rhode Island, and that's the nickname right there. Okay. The next New England colony is Connecticut. Connecticut is also started by people who were trying to escape the Puritans. They come over as Puritans and they're like, oh no, this is like way too much. And so they jump down and create the charter for Connecticut. Why Connecticut is important is for 3 things. Connecticut had the first representative government in the colonies. It has the first constitution in the colonies. And they elected their own governor as opposed to the king saying, this is your governor. They elected their own governor, so it was somebody that they wanted. And then New Hampshire. New Hampshire's not really exciting. King James I of England took land from Massachusetts to make it less powerful because the Puritans were getting too powerful, and he gave, the colony to his friend. So New Hampshire's just not really that exciting. The last thing that we're going to talk about is the New England Confederation. The New England colonies are created. The 4 colonies worked together one time to fight the common enemy of the Native Americans. That creates the New England Confederation. Why this is important is not because they were fighting the Native Americans, but it showed cooperation among the colonies when they had a common enemy. And that common enemy is soon going to be the King of England, where the colonies will band together to fight in the Revolutionary War. But that is why that New England Confederation is important. All right, so I hope you filled out your document as we've been going through. If you have any questions or you need me to explain anything else, let me know. Good job.